Hi, I'm Heidi from Daltons. I'm joined today by my colleague Peter Stewart, who is our resident houseplant expert. This is a peace lily. We know it's being ready to be repotted because the roots coming out of the bottom. So let's do some repotting. This is quite a small pot. What size should we really be going up to? Is there a rule?
You should really only go to 1 or 2 sizes larger than the pot that the plant's already in, because if you go too big, you end up with a huge reservoir of water sitting here, which just causes the plant to get cold and overwatered. Before you repot any plants, you have to make sure they're well watered. So you get yourself a bucket, and it's a good idea to use a product such as a sea feed, which is a seaweed-based product, which just gives the plant a tonic in preparation for repotting.
We just pop the plant in.
Yep, dunk the plant in and let it soak for a few minutes.
So while you're doing that, it's a good idea to put your gloves on, especially if you're going to be handing potting mixes.
Opening it up, just face it away from yourself in a well-ventilated area. So we just put a little bit of potting mixture in the bottom of the... I'm a hands man.
Can use a trowel.
In the bottom of the in the pot. Then what you want to do before you do anything else is you just want to test that you're going to pot it to the right height. It's important that when the plant finishes back in the new pot, that the soil level is at the same level as is in this pot. So then we remove the pot. Just slip your fingers around the pot, around the plant should I say, tip it upside down, give it a tap, and the pot should come off. Sometimes you find that it's quite root bound and you have to manipulate the pot a little bit, squeeze a little bit so that you can pull it off. Place it back in the pot, make sure it's centered, and we just fill the pot up.
We're just pressing it down around the pot as you go.
Give it a good drink.
And you may notice that the soil level drops a little bit, so you may need to just give it an extra little bit of a top up.
Put it in a semi-shaded position for a day or two before you put it back into a lighter position.
Houseplants like a humid environment, so it's a good idea to spray the foliage, which is the leaves, what, once a week?
Once a week, yes, that's a good idea. You do it in the morning as opposed to the evening, so that the leaves can dry out during the day and then you don't get any fungus diseases build up overnight. You just get a damp cloth and you just give a little wipe, and that will remove any dust and dirt that might be on the foliage. It's also a great way of removing any insect pest problems you might have. This particular product has a 10-month controlled release fertilizer in it, so it will slowly release fertilizer into the soil as the plant needs it. I would probably wait 5 to 6 months before I gave it some supplementary feeding. And you can use a product such as these tabs, and you just simply push that down into the soil, cover it up, and every time you water it, it just releases a little bit more fertilizer.
So the best time to repot orchids is around July?
June, July, just before the active growing season, using a Dalton's premium orchid mix, which is a bark mix. It's very, very porous because the orchids actually take their moisture and their nutrients from the outside of the bark within the potting mixture. So you need to use a very fibrous potting mixture when potting orchids.
The orchids prefer to have their food delivered in a soluble form. So we have our Dalton's premium orchid food. So how often should we be feeding our orchids?
Orchids are quite gross feeders, so you want to be feeding them about every 2 weeks to promote flower colour and setting of more flower spikes, particularly with a moth orchid, and to give good foliage colour.
What do you think is probably one of the biggest killers of houseplants?
The biggest killer of houseplants is too much love, too much attention, too much water. Controlling the amount of water you give them is very important. There have been thousands of watering devices invented throughout the years and watering meters invented throughout the years, but that's the best one. Stick it in there every week or so. If the soil's moist, leave it alone. If it feels dry, give it a little bit of water.
I've got a plant here actually that needs a little bit of help, so might get you to do a bit of a diagnosis if that's okay.
Okay.
So what is this?
This is a Philodendron, very hardy houseplant. Prefers filtered light, but very tough and resilient. The yellowing of the leaves or the lightening of the colour of the leaves is a first indicator that the plant's hungry. It needs some nitrogen, it needs a balanced fertiliser, and of course these Dalton's houseplant tabs be ideal to put into the soil, and that would just regularly feed it over 6 to 10 months. Pot this size, you'd put 3 of them in, and then every time you watered it, it would get a little bit of food. The other thing the plant's suffering from, apart from physical damage, is you see this browning on the foliage? That's caused by erratic watering. So that's letting the plant dry out and then watering it, letting it dry out and watering it. Every time we let it dry out, you get a little bit of burning on the ends of the roots of the plant, and that causes the browning on the leaves here. So try and have a more consistent watering regime. And the magic watering indicator says this plant is dry. When a soil is moist enough, it's a dark brown colour. When it's a light brown colour like this, it needs watering. So a good watering, a good feed, and that plant will bounce back and it'll be a lush, beautiful plant again.
Thanks so much, Peter, for coming along and sharing all your helpful advice and experience.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope that you've learnt a lot today and found out different ways to look after your houseplants. Happy gardening.